Good morning, Gearheads. Welcome to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM. This is John Massengale. I'm sitting in the studio in Austin, Texas, and we're about an hour away from the Formula One 70th Anniversary Grand Prix at Silverstone. But I am joined by my cohorts, Les Kaiser and former Haas F1 team manager Dave O'Neill. Good morning, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great, doing great. Ready for the second round in the British world.
Silverstone round two. How about you, Dave? You getting excited for this race?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. When we see the overhead shots, I'm going to see my house in the UK. So looking forward to see who's in my garden.
Check on your gardener, make sure he's keeping it up.
Exactly, yeah. Get the drone in.
Well, I'm excited about this. Last weekend, the race itself was not that exciting until the last couple of laps, and then it turned into one of the most epic finishes in Formula One. So if somehow we can have an even remotely as exciting race, I think I'll be excited. But this is one of the most iconic places on the circuit, of course, on the calendar, because Silverstone, with its history going back to the first original Formula One Grand Prix, is just part of what makes this special. But Dave, I want to ask you, why is this such a special race?
I think, as you alluded to, it's just a history that's been laid down there. I mean, it was an airfield back in the day, which then got converted over the years into some racing tracks, and now into, like you say, one of the greatest tracks and fastest as well. We have to remember most of it's high speed, and it's a long track, effectively on the calendar, not the longest, but 5.8 Ks, 3.66 miles long, 18 turns, most of them fast, apart from the last bit where the complex comes into the straight. So it's effectively turned around as well. We've got the new pits there as well, which have been there for I don't know, maybe seven years, something like that. So they've come into play and twisted the circuit around a little bit, where where we call it the main straight. It's got its own microclimate as well, which tends to play havoc with the weather forecasters over the course of the weekend. So what you see is not always what you get on the weather, and it could be sunny one minute, and then the heavens could open the next minute. Lots of wind up there as well, so that tends to move the weather around as well. But yeah, it's right in the middle of nowhere, effectively. So you talk about Grand Prix that need to you need to bring the Grand Prix to the people. This one's slightly opposite. The people always want to come and see this one, whereas you have the likes of Singapore and Monaco, where you park a track right in the middle of the city. This one's out in the middle of nowhere. Nearest village is Silverstone, obviously, which is probably 2 miles from the circuit. And then you move on to maybe somewhere like Towcester or Northampton, which is probably a bigger spot on the map, which is about 8 to 10 miles away. So probably something in the region of 68, 70 miles north of London. So situated in the Midlands in the UK, probably 40 miles south of Birmingham. But yeah, it's one of my favourite tracks, mainly because I could stay at home when I race there.
Dave, that's fantastic. I haven't heard that much detail about it. I mean, I generally knew the layout, but I got a question for you. Thinking of here in Austin, and I don't want to derail everything, but if it's that so far away from all the other development, why hasn't development moved there? Why hasn't there been, we expect that around a racetrack such as, especially with such prominence, that there would be development near it, closer than what you've described.
Yeah, I mean, that is a good question. And also one of the interesting things about Silverstone, it's sort of split in 2/3 into 2 counties. So when it comes to planning permission, there's always a reasonable reasonably long argument of getting anything signed off. But the development there over the last 18 months has really, really blown up. They've put probably another 1,200 houses in Silverstone Village. And then also there's a technical park, which has been starting to happen over the last 18 months. And all the fields where all the camping was happening, just outside of the main gate. They have all sorts of things going on there, and mainly mainly the new technology stuff, battery places, cars. Also, Racing Point have got planning permission for a huge factory there, which is going to bring a lot more jobs into the area. So yeah, that's good. Maybe when the helicopter shot comes over, you'll be able to see all the new buildings. But people do travel. You know, you travel to work in the UK. An hour's not a problem. So people travel in from Oxford, some from London, and the surrounding areas.
Well, Dave, when you think of Silverstone, I always think of the iconic corners, but big G's, big speed, big downforce, and now big tire wear. And I guess that's a lot of that can be attributed to the resurfacing they've done.
Yep, I think so. And you know, we also got to remember that Formula One pushes the boundaries all the time. So how much more downforce have these cars got on the front? I think they're all pushed along by Mercedes engines, the ones that had the tyre trouble in the last event. And also you've got to wonder what they've done to fix it. Looking at the times, both Mercedes, but in the top three are over a second quicker than their next competitor. So
yeah,
they've got some serious downforce, and once you've got downforce, the tyres have to match the downforce. They get pushed down and they get rolled over. And tyres are like balloons at that sort of stage. When if they, I know they said there was no debris that touched them, but I think that the high wear could be a stone, could be anything that sets the delamination off. So yeah, that's the interesting bit, and it's the bit we don't know is how much more points of downforce they've put on between this race and the race before, which I assume is quite a few points, maybe 6 or 7.
Yeah, and now we're dealing with a different set of tires. Last week we went one step softer on the tires. You know, they had planned that just because they had a race at the same venue and they wanted to shake things up a bit. But after last week, you would think that it was almost the opposite. But that's a big change for the team strategically. And I don't know. I guess, Dave, having been there, done that, you know, what comes to mind when you think, okay, last week we had all this tire wear and we're, you know, cars not even able to finish the race, and now we're going one step softer even.
Yeah, and that's the first thing, you know, for a logical mind would be, let's go harder. We can last longer, but also when you look at all the numbers after the race weekend, you say, well, actually, let's go softer. We can do a couple of extra stops, and we can still go quicker at the end. So yeah, there's different ways of slicing the cake up, and I would have thought that that's probably the Mercedes thinking is put another stop in, put another set of tyres on, and be even quicker.
Man, like you said about Mercedes, the gap, I mean, qualifying, the gap is a full second. So the potential of these cars is a full second but ahead of the next team, which is actually one of the best stories of the weekend. So the qualifying yesterday was Valtteri Bottas on pole just ahead of Hamilton, which is a big story in itself, someone not other than Hamilton on pole. But Nico Rosberg, brand new back, you know, what was it, 10, 12 days ago, was sitting at home, you know, not watching Formula One, racing other race series. And here he is, third on the grid at the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. That's got to be an amazing feeling. Les, I know you love this story. Les, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
I was saying, I know you love this story about Nico Hulkenberg, Nico Rosberg.
I love it. You know, to me, this is, you know, for you, Mr. football Aggie. This is the 13th man. The guy's pulled out of the stands, thrown out onto the track. Come throw the home run. Come throw the winning pass. And I love it that he's come back. He's made a scene. To me, he's got that personality that you like, but it reminded people that Nico Hulkenberg is a quality driver. He is a solid performer. He's earned his spot there, and he ought to be there.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anybody that can argue.
He ought to be there. And not only that, no telling what could happen from next year with what he's shown everyone. He is quite a bit faster than Lance Stroll yesterday, so like 0.4. And I mean, the doors for him have got, he was already on people's lists. But the fact that he could come in and do this is really pretty amazing. And the fact that these other teams, with the shakeup with Vettel leaving Ferrari and maybe going to Racing Point, I mean, that could start the dominoes falling and no telling where he could end up. But
okay, Mr. Team Manager sitting here, what about this guy? As a team manager, you knew who he was beforehand, but he exited the door for whatever reasons. Everybody's going to argue about that. But Dave, did you ever stop thinking about him in a team manager role if you were on the playing field nowadays?
No, not at all. I did a series back in the early 2000s called A1, not in existence anymore. But anyway, long and short of it was Nico did that series, came in as a young German driver managed by Willy Webber, and he virtually won every race. So I knew how good he was before he put his foot in the F1 paddock. But he was on our list at Haas, and for uncomplicated or complicated reasons, the dominoes never fell in the right direction. But I don't know. I'm not in Haas anymore. But I wouldn't be surprised to see him there. I know Günther has a fond corner for him. He's quick, and he'll do a solid job each weekend. He's also very strong in the head, which you need. And I think someone, like you say, you can argue about what happened with Renault all day long, but I just think that he fell out of favour there, and he'd been there quite some time. He did a fantastic job at Racing Point, and maybe he made the wrong or right decision when he left there. But we'll see at the start of 2021 who he's put pen to paper with. But you can't keep him off the grid, I don't think.
Okay, I love how you just glided by that. Günther likes him. He had a corner set for him. Can we get that corner dusted out and let him move in now?
Well, you've got to say it's definitely worth a conversation, isn't it? And again, I'm not privy to the information now on who's signed for what and who's managed who and who's got the spot for 2022. So maybe we should get Günther on next week for Silverstone and give him a poke and ask him about that. He tends to like answering those sort of questions.
Yeah, we need to do that.
Okay, get on it, John.
Yeah, well, he's thinking the same thing everyone else is thinking is at least Haas fans, is that we would love to have Nico Rosberg. So, hey, guys, let me run down the qualifying grid because it was exciting qualifying. And, anytime that Hamilton's not on pole, you start with that being exciting. But so, yeah, like I mentioned, it was Valtteri Bottas, his teammate, on pole. Lewis Hamilton next, then Nico Rosberg, then Max Verstappen. And he was right on the tail of Nico Hulkenberg. Excuse me, I keep saying Rosberg. But 126.
Maybe we should have got Rosberg in. Why didn't Rosberg come back?
I know, it's true. I guarantee you that his name was thrown about when Sergio Perez was not able to race. But in fact, I know I've heard other people talking about that he was on that list. Of course, there's
Wait a minute. I haven't heard of him doing anything to stay in shape. Am I just out of the tune? Am I under the rock as far as
I don't know about that, but he's one of a short list with a super license. I think that was the criteria you start with, is that who can actually jump in a car legally, and he was on that list. So,
So was Rossi.
yeah, yeah. Alexander Rossi was throwing his hat in the ring on Twitter. He was basically, just tweeting out like, "Hello, I'm out here."
I know that track. Like,
Yeah.
well,
Max Verstappen was right behind Hulkenberg with a 126, 176. And then Daniel Ricciardo looking good with a 126, 297 right on Max's tail. And then Lance Stroll, 126, 428, not far behind Ricciardo. If you're noticing a trend here, yeah, we had a full second gap from Lewis Hamilton to Hulkenberg. But then after that, of course, like it has been in the last 2 years, really, that midfield is just so tight. So after Stroll was Pierre Gasly at 126, 534, and then Leclerc in the Ferrari in 8th place and 126, 614. Albon, 126, 669 in 9th. And then Lando Norris, 126, 778. And then that was 10th. And then Esteban Ocon, Sebastian Vettel, 12th. And that's just continuing troubles for Sebastian Vettel. We got a lot to talk about there. But then Carlos Sainz, Roman Grosjean, George Russell, Daniel Kvyat, Kevin Magnussen, 17, Nicholas Latifi, Giovinazzi, and Kimi Räikkönen in last. But I think I want to talk about the Ferraris right now because once again, Leclerc considerably faster than Sebastian Vettel. And I liked Sebastian Vettel's response just because he was basically saying, I don't know, I'm getting all I can out of the car. And I know it's possible that the car, but Dave, what do you think about what's going on with the Ferrari, with the gap really between Leclerc and Vettel?
I think, my personal opinion is I think Leclerc is just a couple of tenths quicker than Vettel naturally. I think he's at that stage in his career where he can reach that limit, and maybe Vettel's struggling to get there. We also can't put aside maybe Vettel's been turned down a little bit just to show him who's boss. Ferrari like the Constructors' Championship, but they also love the Drivers' Championship as well. So that's probably worth thinking about.
Wow, I never would have thought of that, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, does what's going on in Vettel's head? Is he's thinking about next year. He hasn't got a drive. He's got his family at home. That's maybe a tenth or two there. So all of a sudden, it all stacks up pretty quickly. And you haven't got someone who's 22 who wants a world championship because he hasn't got one. And I'm sure when you've got 4, you probably want 5. But when you get to this point where you jump in a car that is at least a second off the pace, it's like, well, reality is here. Okay, I can go as fast as I can. The first thing you have to do is beat your teammate. And he's certainly showed him it. Leclerc certainly showed Vettel the way for, I don't know, I'd like to say the last 2 seasons. He's definitely came out charging. So I'd have to say Vettel's probably had his day there. When you were showing me when you had the numbers up there for qualifying, the one guy that keeps impressing me day in, day out, every race is Lando Norris. I mean, he is so quick, and he hasn't had the odd good race. He's had every race has been good. He hasn't made any stupid mistakes. He's on the level I'd put with Leclerc and Verstappen. I think those 3 are on a different level, certainly, because they haven't got Mercedes. But when it comes to driving and wringing the best out of the car or the machine that you're in, those 3 are definitely doing it.
And how exciting is that to have these young drivers like this that 3 years ago were not even on the grid, and we knew Max was going to be the future of Formula One for a long time, but now we've got Leclerc and Lando Norris. That not only is Lando amazing in the car, but he's got everything else the intangibles. From a marketing standpoint, he's fantastic because he's incredibly active and funny and just great on social. And by mean social, I mean across the board, you name it, on every single platform, including Twitch. But hey, guys, let's go ahead and get our first break in. And when we come back, we'll be less than an hour away from the 70th anniversary Grand Prix of Formula One. You listen to Speed City, back after these messages.
Hi, this is Jay Leno from JayLenosGarage.com, and you're listening to Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM.
All right, welcome back. When we went to break, what do you got, Dave?
No, I was saying I had the
Jay Leno, right?
Yeah, I had the luxury of having a nice tour around Jay Leno's garage in Burbank on Friday.
Oh my
which
gosh,
was pretty impressive. Yeah.
I mean, how huge is that place? Isn't it like 100,000 square feet or something insane like that?
Yeah, I mean, it just goes from kind of one building to the other with all sorts of toys in that you just want to drive. You know, you just walk through and all sorts of stuff, racing cars and old Brooklands race cars. Yeah, I mean, it was fantastic. I loved every minute of it.
I feel like I've seen a good bit of that collection. I know you too, Les. I'm a big fan of the YouTube show. I like his television show too, but my favorite is the YouTube show because he just goes through his collection every week and pulls out another car.
During the quarantine.
Yeah, that's right. It's interesting during the quarantine how he's handled it too. But well, hey guys, we are now, let's see exactly how we're 45 minutes from the race, the Formula One 70th Anniversary Grand Prix. But we were going down the grid a little bit. We had just talked about the young drivers, including Gasly, Leclerc and Lando Norris. But Gasly, you could put on that list. Lance Stroll, you could put on that list too, because we talked about it last week. Les and I did how Lance Stroll has surprised us, really almost from day one. But also looking down, Verstappen continues to impress. Daniel Ricciardo looked really good, but what about Albon? Les, what do you think about Albon? You were good predicting last year with with his team and what could happen with that seat. What do you think about Albon this year?
Albon's got to stabilize himself. We mentioned it a little bit the other day. Pierre Gasly was up in 7th now, and where's Albon? Albon's back in 9th. Those guys are going at it, and I feel like regardless of what the end of the race or the qualifying looks like, Gasly has stepped up his game this year and is right there sparring with Albon. And I think Alex better get himself sorted. What do you think, Dave?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I thought he was going to do the business when he first came in. And again, maybe that was beginner's luck, but there's certainly something that he's not able to click with in the car, which I believe is the understeer. He's struggling with the understeer. So maybe they've designed the car around Max with his driving style, which is pretty aggressive. And Albon's maybe not able to learn it. So they do say in some of the reports I've read and people I've spoken to is that they're trying to make the car more of an oversteery car for Albon. So there's certain ways of doing that, but also if you design the car like that, maybe it's slower when you do have those attributes. When you have the grip laid out the way it is. So yeah, I feel sorry for him, but it's part of racing, and you've got to have two drivers that are at the same strength and pull in all the points you can every time you get in the car. But the other one we've missed off that list, I think we haven't got to yet, unfortunately, is Russell. He's definitely, in my book, he should be in the new gang, I would have thought, given the material to drive one day soon.
Yeah, no doubt. He has been very impressive, man, and looking, again, putting a gap on his teammate. Speaking of gaps on his teammate, I don't think he's ever been out qualified by his teammate, including last year. And there's big expectations from him, I believe, in the long run. So I think he absolutely needs to be on that list.
Dave, I got to ask, team-wise, it's been quite a while that we've been looking for the big Williams name at the bottom of the list, but now we've been seeing Alfa Romeo back there, and quite honestly, I can't say whether it's that Williams has stepped up or Alfa has backslid into place. What is your view of that?
Well, I think it's an interesting question, and one of the reasons being is that we've kind of stayed at the same circuits for 2 or 3 times. So I think we'd have to probably see how Silverstone played out. The power circuits seem to favour Mercedes for sure, and also Renault, with McLaren and Renault being there. So I would have thought maybe with that in mind, Ferrari are struggling for power. We kind of all know roughly where that's coming from, but I'd say that's probably a big attribute. Silverstone's extremely fast, and you need a good motor to push that around, and also to have everything in line with the batteries and the power deployment side of things. So you might have the downforce, but you definitely need the power around Silverstone.
Les, I had looked up some stats. I just found them again. These are on racefans.net, but I looked this up last week. And looking at the Hungaroring is what I'm looking at from a couple weeks ago. And it shows the increase or decrease in lap times. And it looks like in the middle is Haas. They kind of haven't changed much. I'll drop back a little bit, but it looks like Alpha has had the largest increase. So they've done the worst compared to last year. And Williams has done the second best to Racing Point. So statistically, at least, this is a little bit anecdotal because it's just that one race, but statistically, no one can touch Racing Point, right? They're obviously in fact, at the Hungaroring, almost 3 seconds a lap. That's just insane. But Williams. What do you
see about Alfa Romeo?
They're at the bottom. They're exactly what you were saying. They have stepped backwards, what it looks like. Now, what I want to find is the same statistic for the whole season, right? But yeah, it looks like that Ferrari and Haas have kind of stayed where they were with no improvement. But Racing Point dramatically improved, Williams improved, AlphaTauri, Mercedes, Renault, but Red Bull also backwards from last year. Now that was at the one race at Hungaroring, but still, I think that's a good stat because it does show that what you were saying is like, hey, that's what's going on with Alfa Romeo. So yeah, but good question, Les, because it has been. I mean, anytime you see Kimi Räikkönen at the back, you think, okay, we don't want that, number one, because he's too much fun to talk to, and you don't get much microphone time and camera time back there. But yeah, that's what it looks like has happened. But hey, guys, I want to talk about something that has been on everybody's mind, but I think producers, we need to go ahead and take our next break. Yeah, let's go ahead and take a break. But when we come back, we're going to talk about the Racing Point and the Racing Point penalty and fine and everything that went down with that with Renault's protest, because it was a huge story and we got all the details. So let's stay tuned and we'll be back after these messages.
Hello, I'm Felipe Massa, and this is Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on SiriusXM.
All right, welcome back to the show. Formula One 70th Anniversary Grand Prix coming up in about 35 minutes. And you can hear the entire race right here on SiriusXM Channel 211. Hey, I'm going to give out the phone number if anybody wants to call and join the conversation. And it's 512-643-LIVE, 512-643-5483. Give us a shout out. Tell us what you think is going to happen today. Call and talk to a former F1 team manager, Dave O'Neill. We got him here. But I think what we ought to talk about next, gentlemen, is probably the biggest story in the last week or so, and that is the Racing Point protest by Renault and how they've come up with a verdict and found the Racing Point team guilty. But wait a minute. They're guilty, but they get to keep the car as is. Les Kaiser, what the heck is going on?
What in the world? Cats and dogs sleeping together. All righty, guys. So this is an interesting one. There's the rules of 2019 that come into play, and then there's the new rules of 2020. So let's go back to 2019. You know, when we used to shake hands and high five each other in the paddock.
Yeah.
What a wonderful era in our life. So in 2019, you could source parts from other teams, including, in this particular example, the brake ducts. So the brake ducts that are in question came from Mercedes. They're on Racing Point's car, and last year they got the front and the rear brake ducts from Mercedes. But they only ran and used the front brake ducts last year at one point. And so that brings in another term that F1 likes to use, and that is the DNA. The DNA is something that was integral to the car, integral that they've used it before. It is adopted and accepted as a part of that car for that season. And this we're saying specifically the brake ducts that were brought in from Mercedes. So we've defined what DNA is. Little caveat there, they didn't use the rear duct brakes last year that they got from Mercedes, and we're talking Racing Point. So that is a big difference in the change. The rules changed from 2019 to 2020. In 2020, we have the listed parts that now include those brake ducts. That is something that is, like I said, that's a change. If Racing Point went to buy those brake ducts from Mercedes or source them there, it wouldn't be allowed right now. That is a team developed component per the listed components. Because they did use the front brakes in 2019 that they sourced back in 2019, that's DNA. Because they did not use the rear brake ducts in 2019, it is not part of the DNA, and it is still acknowledged that those were sourced from Mercedes. That's a long way around that situation.
Well, okay. So, but why? And this is a question for both of you guys, but why are they able to? Okay, it's determined they broke the rules, right? In some form or fashion. And this is a 14-page document, by the way. But why are they able to continue to run the car with those brake ducts?
The technical description and the rules allow them to run the front brake brake ducts because they were now considered part of the DNA. It is not the spirit of the rule. Spirit is kind of, oh, well, we meant to include it and make it clearly defined so there was no arguable point around it.
I know one part of this story is that, okay, so the brake ducts themselves, they meet the spec for the current season, right? They meet the spec, so they're not illegal parts. But the sporting regulation is what was violated, right? The sporting regulation. So I heard a good analogy, and it was essentially that, let's say they had developed these brake ducts by using more than the allotted time on a wind tunnel. So they would have broken the wind tunnel rule, but the part itself is still legal because it still fits within the spec. So it's a legal spec. It's just the way it was developed was illegal. So I think that's a good comparison. And Dave, does that, you've been in the chair to help, make the decisions on how to develop parts. Is that a good analogy? You think that's a good, decent comparison?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair. I mean, it's such a complicated part of the car, and that's why we're talking about it, because it's not just it's not just a fuel hatch on a car or a wheel nut or something. It's something that gives a huge amount of downforce, and I think that's why it's been pinpointed. I'm sure there's other bits and pieces on the cars that are pretty close or maybe even the same. In fact, are the same. But the brake duct gives you a huge amount of downforce, and the development of the brake duct is a long-winded process, and you can spend millions you can pinpoint figures between 5 and 10 million on brake duct development on a Formula One car over the year. It's not just cooling the brake ducts. You get downforce out of it, and also what you're trying to do is get all the hot air from the brakes out as well. So it's really important, and also it channels the cooling for the brake calipers. You've got to keep the fluid in the brake calipers under 240 degrees, otherwise you tend to start boiling the fluid, and once you do that, you get a soft pedal. So when you encase the brakes like that, the first thing you do is trap a load of heat, and the reason you're doing that is because with the brake duct is to get rid of the hot air for a start, get some downforce, and then also cool all the rotor, the brake pads, brake caliper, and then on each corner of a Formula One car, certainly at the front, you've probably got in the region of 20 to 30 sensors that need cooling as well, which all have wires hanging from them. So you imagine the brakes glowing red at 800 to 1,000 degrees, and then all these little wires around them that melt, and all the glues in the resin and in the brake duct. So very, very complicated. And also when you go from a wind tunnel model to the full size, that's when the translation kind of dilutes a little bit. So that's why I think there's so much emphasis being put on the brake duct. It's just such a small part of the car, but once you've taken it off the wind tunnel model and then made it into the real thing, and then the designers have interpreted from the wind tunnel model what they think it should be, and then it's gone back. It's just something that is really important to get right. Otherwise, you it's no point putting it on the car.
Yeah,
from that point.
I've heard learned so much about brake ducts in the last week, and that's what you're saying is a significant aspect of this, because Formula One said it is such a crucial part, such a significant portion of not only downforce, but like everything you said. And so that's been a big part of this. And what you just said about boiling the brake fluid, if you've ever been there, and I've been there on the street, and that's a long time ago, but but that is an ugly situation, because essentially you hit your brake pedal after successive, hits of the brake pedal, and you got nothing. So it is that's a scary place to be. But okay, so let's talk about the penalty itself. So they get to keep the brake ducts, and they get to continue to be one of the fastest cars on the grid. But okay, one more question to you, Dave. If you've got the choice, they say, all right, you can do this, whether you're planning this ahead of time, thinking, all right, I'm going to take the risk, but you get fined 400,000 euros and you get 15 points taken away. To me, this seems like a no-brainer. I would do it, because, depending on how you look at this from a sporting or ethical standpoint, in this case, 15 points, they may be able to make that up in a weekend or 2 weekends. And 400,000 euros, like you just said, that's nothing. That's a fraction of the budget. I mean, it seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, I think, like, that's why we're here talking about it, is Formula One's so close to the rules, just the way it sails year in, year out, that it's something you have to take risks on. And then once you go down that road, it's like, well, how do you turn around and come back from that? If the boss man says do that, off you go and do it, don't you? Do what you're told, type thing. But the fine, the fine's nothing, is it? It's just pocket change to Mr. Stroll, so he'll deal with that. It's no problem. Points wise, I'd say that's the killer for them. Could make all the difference to being the build up to 50 million difference at the end of the year, wherever they finish, if they finish in the top 3 or 4 of the championship. So that's huge points wise, and then that kind of pales the 400,000 into insignificance. But I think certainly up that end with Stroll, having his name dragged through the dirt is probably the most offensive thing for him, rather than the points and the money. So I guess that would be interesting, whether it's a load of hot air or whether he actually does something and tries to clear it up completely. is another thing. But I mean, the cat's out of the bag now. The ruling's been made. They're going up for appeal. So I guess watch your space. But
Yeah,
it's interesting.
Yeah, it is going to be interesting to see how this plays out with all the other teams now joining the fray and in their appeals to it. But you just alluded to something that's actually been one of the biggest stories overnight, and that is that Lawrence Stroll is extremely angry over Racing Point verdict and appalled by his rivals, and because he's saying that the fact that he's appalled that they gave him the penalty, I don't know. I guess he's just saying he interpreted it differently. But Les, what do you think about Lance Stroll's dad, in his opinion on this?
I think you're playing with the big boys in Formula One, FIM, and the rules are the rules. We've seen their judgments. They may not be always consistent or dependable. You knew the game you were getting into around that part of it is part of the game. The fact that every other team, I think, Ferrari, McLaren, Renault, and Williams are all saying, we're going to appeal this if they come to track on Sunday. Well, obviously, they're going to race on Sunday. And so it should be really interesting. I think when you have that many other teams that are coming after you, I think it's pretty indicative that this is kind of beyond reason. I don't sense teams being just a feeding frenzy because maybe they do or don't like Lawrence Stroll. I think it's valid. I think he's acting the victim when maybe he just pushed the bounds too far, or his team did.
Yeah. And you know what? There's a bit of a story about the Haas F1 team in this whole situation, because Gunther Steiner's was, he was rejected the claims that his team broke the brake duct rules because there was some question about the same thing going on with Haas F1. And I don't, this is interesting how this could maybe get a little more far-reaching. And it is a big rule change that was not clarified. And also, what about the way that F1 had Racing Point come to them and said, hey, let's talk about this. What are we supposed to do? That they would have come to a resolution, come to an answer without fines. And I don't know, maybe they would have said, you can't use it. And now you end up with the good parts. So this is going to be an interesting story to watch continue down the road. So we'll just have to see. Hey, one thing we didn't talk about, guys, is Esteban Ocon, because he's got a penalty today because he ended up essentially holding up George Russell and during qualifying yesterday. And I saw that, and it looked, the commentators when that happened were talking about how dangerous a situation that is, and of course, that is a dangerous situation, and we see it quite often. At least this year, it seems like more, where you get a slower car in qualifying. Everybody's trying to set up their qualifying lap, and they're driving so slow. And George Russell came right up on Esteban Ocon, but he is now he's got a penalty, so he's not gonna start where he ended up after qualifying yesterday. So, but what do you guys think about that in general? I mean, they're talking about maybe even setting a minimum lap time in qualifying. What do you think about that, Dave?
Well, I mean, it's kind of been talked about for years, and also blows up every other weekend when the Blues are about. There's so much to look at when you're sitting on the pit wall. I mean, the bigger teams have got people back at the factory looking at flags, situations. So when you hear someone say, I didn't see them come up or anything, that's, for me, there's no excuse anymore. And also, like Charlie Whiting used to say, when we're talking about the blue flags, what comes around goes around. So if you do impede someone, it's coming to get you down the road. It's just when it's going to come and get you. So I think the teams have got enough. There's GPS feeds. There's so much information on the screen to be able to give that information to the driver. And And Silverstone in particular, it's not like Monaco where it's hard to get out of the way. Silverstone's so wide, you can pull over to the side when you've lifted off or done your lap, or even waiting to do your lap. When you're warming the tyres up, you can keep to one side or the other. And I just think that, you know, he impeded him. He might have been a slower car, but he still has the right to do his lap. And again, it goes back to the brake ducts. There's a gentleman's agreement there as well between the drivers that once you've done your lap, or on a slow down lap, or on a lap that you're preparation lap, you keep out of the way of the others. You've also got mirrors on the car as well, so you've got mirrors. You've got all the feed from your engineers, and you know when you're running the session that you can get knocked back places on the grid, and qualifying is the most important thing of the weekend. You know, that's what you practice for, and when you go and do qualifying, you know, you're up there. You want to do the best you can. So I don't know. I don't really feel sorry for him. I think it's part of the game. He didn't get out of the way. He might have had some problems in the car. I don't know. He might have been twiddling some switches or whatever, but he still would have had the information from the engineer saying, you know, Russell was out of turn 5. He's coming up behind you. They literally go through lap by lap and corner by corner when you're slowing down. So if you are breaking down or you do have any issues, the engineer would be talking to him all the time.
That was what I thought. I thought, you know, there's these cars have got good radios, and somebody's, you know, both drivers are going to know. If both drivers don't know, then somebody's not doing their job, is what it feels like to me. But hey, guys, we got to take a break, and when we come back, we'll be right up on top of the start of the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix in Formula One. You're listening to Speed City live from Austin, Texas. Back after these messages.
I'm Jenny Gow from BBC F1. You are listening to Speed City.
You're listening to Speed City F1 on Sirius XM.
Yeah, that was Jenny Gow. You'll be able to hear the BBC broadcast, the play-by-play of the 70th Anniversary Grand Prix in Formula One here in about 15 minutes. And if that race ends up anywhere near as good as last week, man, that was such an exciting finish, and we were just bouncing off the walls in here. But Hey, write the phone number down because if we get a race that's got some things that you want to talk about, it's 512-643-5483, and we'll be back after the race with our 1-hour post-race show. So give us a call after the race, too, because that's when it's really fun to get your thoughts and opinions on what just happened. But I want to run down.
What I enjoy?
Yes, sir.
I got to jump in because I want the audience to get in on this. One of the things I enjoy is that we've got Dave O'Neill, former team manager of the world of Formula One, all these teams, that we can ask him, what the heck, Dave? Why would they do it that way? So tune in after this. Let's ask the manager.
There you go.
Aaron.
Well, hey, guys, I want to talk about some of the stats after qualifying because there's always some good ones, especially with the momentum that Mercedes has going on right now. And I think one of the most interesting stat is Bottas gave Mercedes a 9th consecutive Silverstone pole, a record at any circuit in F1 history. And I'm ready for these Mercedes records to stop, but they're still interesting. Also, Mercedes have their 199th pole as a power unit supplier in Formula One. That's the 13th pole, career pole for Bottas. And he's won his last 2 starts from pole. One of them was here at COTA, here in Austin last year, 2019, and then Austria earlier this year. And his teammate, Lewis Hamilton, he's either been first or second on the grid for the last 7 consecutive Silverstone races. Wow, another Mercedes record. Mercedes have a 67th front row lockout, extending their own record. So another Mercedes record. Wait, here's another one that's not involving Mercedes. Racing Point. Nico Hulkenberg's P3 is his best start since the 2016 Austrian Grand Prix, where he was second on the grid. And now Racing Point have 2 top 3 starts in the last 3 races. Lance Stroll was P3 in Hungary, and Stroll was P6 today, just as he was the same last week at Silverstone. Max Verstappen is 4th on the grid. The last 4 times a driver has won from 4th on the grid has been a Red Bull. Okay, that's a Red Bull driver. That's an obscure one for you. This is off F1.com, by the way. And with P5, Daniel Ricciardo matched Renault's best qualifying result of the year. Teammate Esteban Ocon was 5th at the Styrian Grand Prix. And it's Ricciardo's best at Silverstone since he was here 4th back in 2016. And for Ocon, it's the first time in 4 career visits here to Silverstone that he's missed the top 10. So some good stats. And I just, we talked about how great the race was, ended up being last week. I just hope that we get a race that's even close to that. But hey, Les, I know that you had a couple things in here that we wanted to talk about. And one of them is about, speaking of all the talk about Racing Point, but there's a new rule coming in to prevent the tracing point that has been this year.
Yeah, they're really looking at shoring up how much you can copy another team, and it's they're still trying to get their hands around it, but it really is an interesting thing. And what it boils down to is Racing Point openly admitting that they took inspiration from last year's Mercedes. Okay, that's normal. That happens in every athletic competition you can imagine, that they look at the other equipment, golf clubs, hockey sticks, whatever. But what they're trying to do is how far you can go into the process of actually copying those components. And so there's a lot more discussion that's going on. It's just going really in depth of how far that you copy a device and how much do you develop upon an idea that you see out on the field or out on the grid. So it really is quite different in what they're trying to address, and there are some boundaries around that. With all of the photography that is out there, we often look to Mark Sutton's photos and he gets some amazing technical photos, close-ups of vehicles. Well, imagine you're another team and you just subscribe to Mark Sutton's photo stream. You can get a lot of really detailed photos that you may not otherwise see of that. That's one thing, but to actually get your hands on the component is another. So we're going to see exactly what they do to finalize that rule and get it around. They accept that individual components will be copied, but they don't want the whole car to be a fundamental copy of another is another aspect. So still to come, but they're controlling it.
Yeah. Dave, I got to ask you, being ex-team manager, but how many photographers do they have, and what other techniques do they use to try to either get photos or gather data or whatever?
Well, I mean, so this is quite an interesting point, because I think it's actually bigger than just a brake duct. What we got to look at, in my opinion, is we've got all the budget cuts happening. And I think this is just one point that's been picked on. With all the budget cuts happening, the smaller teams just will not be able to develop the rate that the bigger teams are. And for me, I think the gap's going to be exponential moving forward. So it's an interesting point. And also, how are they going to police it? Are they just going to say, well, we need to write more components into the rules to say you can buy these from the bigger teams, because the cost is just not viable. I mean, if you have more people working on something, maybe you get more of a mess at the end, but also sometimes you get something that's better at the end as well. So and F1's sort of renowned for putting together procedures and processes, so you end up with something that is worth running, or at least testing anyway. So that's my view. Is it kind of, I think it's bigger than just this brake duct. But going back to your other question on the photography, yes, there's what we call spy photography, and each team tends to rent photographers to hide out and walk up and down the pit lane and snap pictures. One of the main things is the front wing. Everyone wants to know what the front wing looks like underneath. So if you ever watch the Grand Prix, you'll see that there's always two people carrying the front wing, and it's no higher than your waist. And that's one of the instructions you get given by the team manager, the race engineers, is that all front wings have to be carried by two people at all times, not because they're heavy, because they're quite light, is because you don't want that spy photographer to get a picture of the wing underneath. So
that's funny.
That's one thing. And then, of course, all the rest of the car, because they ban the covers. So they ban the covers from anything on the car can't be covered. So the cars are also designed with that in mind. So when you're standing at the front in the pit lane, when the car's undressed effectively, they have certain things that are designed onto the car, so you can't get a good spy zoom lens in there. But one of the other things they do as well, the top maybe 4 teams, they have photographers out at the circuit, not just to take pretty pictures of the car, but they set up at slow speed corners, and they have some huge frame rate cameras that take pictures of the tires, and all this data is sent back to the factory. And I think Mercedes knew exactly what their tyres were looking like. They do slow-mo camera shots, thousands of frames a second or whatever it is. They go back, they get analysed, and they can take the tyre apart effectively at the factory and see how much wear's left on it. And I think they probably got it pretty damn close at the last race. But yeah, the camera's still used. It's used in all areas, but those 2 areas in particular, for sure.
Yeah, that's funny. Yeah, you think about those low-speed corners. Also, I think about whenever a car either stops on track or is in an accident. I'm always looking forward to those shots, because there's times when when maybe body work is off or whatever, and you get to see things that you don't normally get to see. So there's that part of it too. But hey guys, I'm just looking at the clock, and we're about 5 minutes till the start of the race or so. So I want to start talking about a couple things we need to look for. And one thing I want to ask both of you guys, what does Gunther Steiner have up his sleeve this week? Because think about it. So last week we had a Gunther trick by leaving Grosjean out, right? He deviated from the entire rest of the field and rose to as high as P5 and stayed up there for a long time during the race. I mean, Grosjean was in the 5, 6, 7 position for, I don't know, 20 or 30 laps. So that was a gamble a little bit. And then, of course, the week before, the race before, where Gunther had both drivers into the pit lane at the end of the formation lap to switch tires to the medium compound where everybody else was on the rain tires. So Gunther's had a couple of really great, I mean, I think you do what you got to do when where they are in the grid, but I can't wait to see what Gunther's got up his sleeve this week. But thinking about what to watch for this race, I think, number one, we've got Hamilton's got a 30-point lead on Bottas. So if Bottas were to win this race, and stranger things have happened, if Hamilton were to not finish it, then we'd be back right in the hunt of this thing. But Les, what are you going to look for in this race?
I'm, you can just insert the recording from the past 2 years. Watch Max. But the reason I'm going to watch Max this time at the start is he's lined up with Nico. Imagine what the battle would be like if Nico one-upped Max.
Ooh.
Imagine what that does for the end of the season discussions.
Yeah, that's a good one. I like that. What about you, Dave?
Yeah, well, I think, I don't know, like to say it, but I think the first and second is taken care of. How about Stroll? He does get a bashing. He's up there. Ricciardo as well. And then he's one of my favourite at the minute, Norris. I think he's got something to do. I mean, he's coming from quite a way back, but let's see what their strategy's like. And it'd be nice to see a Haas in the top 10 as well.
Yeah, that's a given for me every week to see the Haas F1 team, do what
Absolutely.
they got to do. I think for me, what I'm going to watch for more than anything is what are they going to do with tires? How is this one step softer compound going to break down? Obviously, we're probably going to end up with more stops, but it's just really, it's going to be really interesting after last week to see because of what we got. So I can't wait to see it. But all right, Les, we got just a few seconds left. So tell me who you want to win, who you think's going to win, and or at least get on the grid or get some points.
A romantic story, Nico Hulkenberg.
Yeah, that's a no-brainer, right?
For the win.
Yeah. What about you, Dave?
Daniel Ricciardo, I want to see make ground on where he is from fifth.
There you go.
I'm going to leave it at that.
Yeah, I think for me, I'd like to see Bottas win just to keep the championship under control a little bit. I mean,
yeah,
I'd like to see Hamilton win the championship at the end, but it'd be nice to see some form of racing, which we're lucky enough to get this year.
All right, guys. Well, we're out of time, buddies. Sorry. Thanks, Dave. Sorry to cut you off. All right. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody, and stay with us after the race.